Well, hello. Thanks for watching the Stories from the 78 podcast or listening to it if you're listening to it. I appreciate it either way. I'm talking to you on Friday the 13th, September 13th. So I record these ahead of time, which, not surprising to anybody. But I love Friday the 13th. I think it's one of the randomest, most coolest holidays, if that makes any sense. I've always, as a kid, you grow up and you think that 13 is terrifying and whatnot. And then as I got older, I'm like, no, I think 13 is awesome. And if I can stand the 13th floor, have the number 13, whatever, I love it. So I digress. I just thought I'd say the date I'm actually recording this on because we had a lot going on this week with Rooftop Cinema. We had the Taste of Lakeview Taco Fest, robotic quarterbacking for football, the Folk Fest in Evanston, Ever Restaurant, which is where the Bear recorded a few of their episodes, and Meggy Moo's Dairy Ripple up in Lake Geneva. So yeah, where do I start? Because if you have not been to Chicago in a while or in the summertime, you definitely got to check out the Rooftop Cinema Club in Fulton Market. Pretty cool place. There's a movie theater on top of the Emily Hotel, which is right there in Fulton Market, and super cool thing to do for people who are from out of town. You wear headphones when you watch the movie, and they got some really decent food and all that fun stuff. So it's a movie theater at the end of the day, but in a cool neighborhood with a great setting around you. I really want to dive into the Monarch robotic quarterbacking. These guys graduated from Northwestern in Chicago a few years back and started their company, and they started it elsewhere. They brought it to Chicago this last year, and it's awesome. I forgot the name of the actual device that it's called. It's like I'm looking it up right now to see if I can find it. Let's see if I can find it here. Robotic quarterback, the Seeker. That's what it is. The Seeker. So if you look up Monarch robotic quarterback, you'll see the Seeker, and it's like revolutionizing the NFL world, or the football world, I should say, because colleges are using this. Ohio State, I think, is one of them. Northwestern, and it's basically like for teams to get better in terms of like receivers learning repetition and constant repetition over and over again. So it takes the weight off of the quarterbacks to have to do all that work. So a lot of like NFL players who are like studs in the NFL that can afford this thing have it at their house, where they just have somebody loaded up and it can shoot up to 6 balls and you have to reload it. And it's crazy. They got this little tracker that you wear on your hip, excuse me, and it will follow you wherever you go. So like you run one way or the other, the ball will follow you, and it fires it on a dime, and you can go up from like 28 miles an hour to 68 miles an hour, something crazy like that. So, sorry. So yeah, very cool thing to check out. So if you go over to the website, storiesfromthe78.com, you'll see a little video of it. But it's like a random, like, Hard Knocks looking video, just because that's kind of what it looks like. It's just like this repetition where they set the machine up to run a certain program, and then it fires, and it's interesting, and it really can change practices for the college football scene and of course high school. But it's a little expensive for high school. And the NFL is catching on. There's 1 or 2 teams in the NFL that use it, and they, all accounts, seem to think it's worth the investment. So super cool thing to check out. Interesting story out of Chicago, which, is something I always want to talk about. A couple of festivals that happened this past week with the Lakeview Taco Festival, which, is right on Southport there. So if you've never been to Lakeview, or you want to explore a neighborhood, if you're living out in the burbs or you're coming through Chicago, Lakeview is one of those neighborhoods that you can really get lost in. It's a huge neighborhood. And you got Wrigley Field as kind of like the central tenant that is in Lakeview, even if you're getting more descriptive in Wrigleyville, which is within Lakeview. But yeah, they have so many festivals along the Southport corridor, which is Southport basically from Addison to Roscoe. That would be like the major artery of the corridor. You get a little north there where the Music Box is, all the way up to Clark Street, where it hits Clark Street. So either way, super cool. The Evanston Folk Festival was up at Dawes Park in Evanston. And to my knowledge, it was the first festival that size up in Evanston, and was a awesome. Any kind of festival on Lake Michigan is cool, but when it's a smaller one and not like Lollapalooza, it's just so much more magic. And the amount of artists they had there was great. The talent, the lineup was fantastic. So if you love folk music, you might want to check that out, and whatnot. But the two things I really want to get to in this particular podcast is Meggy Moo's Dairy Ripple. So it's up in Wisconsin. So a lot of folks in Chicago head up to Lake Geneva to, get away from the city for a little while. It's just far enough where it makes you feel like you're 12 hours away from Chicago when you're only like an hour and a half. But this Meggy Moo's Dairy Ripple, I found it by accident because I actually was going up to stay at the Abbey Resort, which is in like the Lake Geneva area, Wadsworth or Walworth. I think it's Walworth, Wisconsin specifically, which is like the little part of the lake that it's on. So we were driving around looking for something to eat, and we found the Dairy Ripple. And this place is old school, man. It's a cool place. It's got the yellow lights on the outside. And I think the yellow lights back in the day were the kind of lights that you wanted to put up to get rid of like the bugs and stuff like that. I think that's what the yellow lights are for. So it's very novelty looking, and it's it's a walk up place. You can drive obviously, but it's a walk up window where you walk up there, and you can get all sorts of ice creams. And I got a banana split. The wife got a sundae, and she also got some sprinkles on a cone. She's pregnant, so fair that is. And it's cheap. It's a good time. The food is great. But the thing I really want to talk about is they have these donut widgets. I've never seen these or heard of a donut widget before, but the donut widget at the Dairy Ripple, it was worth the drive in itself. And they're basically like donuts. So they're like fried balls in deep fried with like cinnamon, sugar, and you eat them and they're hot and they're just freaking fantastic. So I definitely would recommend going up that way. If you're anywhere near the Lake Geneva area, the Dairy Ripple, worth the drive to check out. It's probably like 20 minutes from downtown Lake Geneva, just because you got to drive around the lake. So but it's a very unassuming like spot. It's just right off like the random state highway, and there it is on the corner. You're like, oh, let's check that out. Check it out. The ice cream is great too. It's just like old school, kind of like I hate to compare it to a chain because people take that the wrong way, but I would say it's like Dairy Queen, but more old school, less commercial. So for what that's worth. And finally, Ever, the restaurant in Fulton Market. So there's two stories in Fulton Market we're talking about. The first one being the cinema rooftop, which is it's a few blocks. What is that? A few blocks east of the of this particular spot. That is Ever. And Ever is next to After, which Ever After. And After is a restaurant. It's more of a cocktail lounge, and Ever's the restaurant. And in the middle, which this is so rad, I didn't know this. In the middle, there's like an observatory. I straight up observatory, like looking for planets and stars and stuff that connects them within the inside without going on the outside. But the reason why I'm even talking about Ever is because Chris Duffy is a descendant of the Grant Achatz, who's a descendant of Charlie Trotter, where like the Chicago gastronomy center of the world started. Like Charlie Trotter put Chicago on the map, not necessarily for gastronomy, but put us on the map in terms of culinary, along with like Rick Bayless back in the day. So, Chris Duffy went on his own, and he had a couple places, and Ever is this new place, which they use as the backdrop for a restaurant in the TV show The Bear. So there's a big scene in The Bear, and a spoiler alert, if you haven't watched The Bear yet, I'm sorry, it's been out for like a year, so you can, whatever. You watch The Bear in one of the episodes, and they have like these culinary icons that are all in this restaurant as a goodbye to a restaurant. I think they call it The Funeral, and the restaurant is closing, so they're all celebrating, and it's a big moment for Carmy in that episode because he faces his like nemesis demon boss and gets some satisfaction, I would say, out of it. But The episode's cool because Ever's displayed proudly throughout, and it's also the same restaurant where the episode Forks was filmed, where Cousin was in the kitchen polishing the forks. So you get to check out a little bit of that, and there's also a little bit of a food porn with Chris Duffy talking and showing a little bit of what they do at Ever. It's a cool spot. I got to hang out there for the morning. We did a segment on CBS, and it was awesome, where Curtis Duffy really was hospitable and showed us all the ins and outs of Ever. So the video I took is just my little, wallflower review of that time at Ever. I would highly recommend going there for a dinner if you are a foodie person. If you're not a foodie person, then don't go, because you're not going to get why things cost so much money at this kind of restaurant. You're going to, like, if you, like my dad, right? My dad will go to this restaurant and be like, that's it? That's all I get? And not just my dad. Most people who don't, and not saying that my dad doesn't appreciate fine dining. He does, but that's not his idea of fine dining, along with a lot of many other people. But he just popped in my head. But people who are into fine dining and really into food as an art form, this is like their Super Bowl. This is right up their alley. And I got to see a little bit. And the food is phenomenal. Like, even if it's smaller portions than perhaps, let's say, I don't know, like Bennigan's or Chili's, where it's just ridiculous portions, or like the Olive Garden for most of suburban America, this is not that. This is not that at all. But people wait years, months to get into this place to try this food because it's special. It's a immersive experience, and that has been used so much over the last few years, the immersive experience. But this is because it is sights, sounds, all your senses. You hear the music, you hear the restaurant, you see the staff. It's like a symphony of culinary delights. It really is. It's just it's fantastic. And as a friend of mine would say, boy, chick, you need to check it out. So I'll leave you with that, with this podcast for this week. But I got one episode left of this season. So for those of you who have watched 10 seconds of one or actual full podcast, I do appreciate it. It's the first time getting into podcasting. I started my career in radio, so this is kind of going back home. But, the first few were probably a little whatever, but I think I figured this thing out. And I would appreciate if you kept watching and subscribing to this. I do it every week. I'll probably take a couple weeks off as I gear up for Halloween. But I'm going to kind of take the rest of September off after next week's episode. And we'll get back at it for Halloween. And I got some big news that will be popping up there at the end of November. So, yeah. All right. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and head over. I don't know why I can't talk today. Head over to the website, storiesfromthe78.com. I probably got about 800 stories up there about all things Chicago related that are 90% Chicago related, 10% my travels, which I'm not very exotic. So it's mostly like Wisconsin or, Iowa. So, but I do get out to Maine, and I'm going to Cape Cod. So I'll shoot a little video for that coming up as well. And we'll all report back here when the time is appropriate. But thanks for watching again. I appreciate it. Subscribe, the whole thing. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you later.